Hey Covalence friends, hope you're enjoying this video series thus far. And if you haven't been watching the video series, if you're here just from a random suggestion because you're looking for how to integrate Twilio with an Express.js app, you're actually in pretty good hands. We don't need to watch the previous 4 videos in these series to learn how to integrate Twilio because integrating Twilio is so nice and so seamless. That being said, if you'd like to see how to make a calendar scheduling app, go ahead and check out the previous videos in the series, which I do have linked in the description below. Let's go ahead and hop into it. I did some behind the scenes work to get my environment variables added with my Twilio credentials. I've got my personal Google Voice number, I've got my Twilio number, and I've got my account ID and my account token added here, and I made sure that I closed out of my env file to not undergo the mistake I made in the previous video, which is where I flashed my env on screen not once but twice in that video. So I've got those added here, and I've got my config object set up for it. Now before I start throwing any errors for missing properties here, we have a lot of repeat work here, and it's getting kind of tedious, and there's probably going to be some, even further additional, environment variables we will be adding at some point in the future. So I'm going to create a validator here that we can pass in an object, and I want it to let me know if any of the values are undefined. So I know we do have a check, called isDefined, which is checking for just, if something is explicitly not undefined. But given that we're not dealing with one flat linear property, we're dealing with an object. Let's go ahead and get that typed while we're here. So right now I'm thinking in the context of my environment variables, where every value is either going to be a string or undefined, but I'm probably going to reuse this a good bit in the future. Like, we could use this for if I destructure everything out the rec body and I just want to really quickly validate that nothing is undefined. We can reuse this one a lot. So I'm going to make this type unknown because it really can be pretty much anything. Let's see, object has undefined values. I think that name is distinct enough to where, you're passing in an object. It's also TypeScript, so it's only going to let you pass in an object, period. We're going to use the object values function, which will take an object as an argument and return an array of just the values. So now we have something a little more directly iterable, and we can use the array.sum function, which is fantastic for validation stuff like this. And for every value that we have, we'll return true if at least some values match this condition in this array. So this function name is has undefined values. So the intent of this is to use this in an if statement. So it reads out like, if has undefined values, Twilio config or whatever. So we are going to explicitly be checking for undefined here. I could also just do like a general truthiness check. Is defined above values Boolean or number Boolean? What? Why did I do that? Why did y'all let me get away with that? Is defined. What's using that validator? I don't know. Anyway, if I follow conventions here, I am checking explicitly if it's undefined. Really, I could just be checking to see if not value. Let me do that. Like I'll do this, kind of like makes the typing a little looser, but it catches like more bad. Well, I guess is defined. I could be looking for something that has like a 0 value, and there might be something that I explicitly do want the number 0 for. So I will let it be explicitly matching instead of just doing general truthiness check. So here, I am going to check to see if there are some explicitly undefined values in here. And you know, my two big use cases for it are going to be checking my config objects and my request bodies, which both would either be undefined or their true value. So that works out with me. All right. So now that we've got that, let's go ahead and import my validators. And we'll change this up to and I'm gonna hate that syntax, so let me destructure that out. Here we go. And so these if statements are starting to read out a little more cleanly. We get a lot more reusability out of it. And so now we can finally get to what I was wanting to do from the start, which is throwing an error in the event we have missing environment variables. So, and I do, in this case, I do want to throw unhandled, exceptions here, because I mean, I kind of want my app to crash if I don't have these environment variables. Like, maybe not domain, we'd maybe be fine with, no, because our email validation requires that. So yeah, every one of these environment variables is critical to our application's execution. So we really do need every one of these validated. So I will crash, by throwing an unhandled exception in the event we do have anything missing. But now that we've got that defined, let's go ahead and, kind of similar to our mailer service, I'll create like an SMS service. So let me go ahead and install the Twilio library. Don't remember if that has types or not, but we'll see. I'll let it yell at me if it does. Cool. They do provide their own type definitions, so we can go ahead and uninstall it. All right. But we'll go ahead and import the Twilio library from Twilio. We'll import our config file from our config directory, or our config default export, that is. Let's see. And in order to create our client, it's going to be a very similar process as Mailgun. We instantiate our Twilio client by providing our account ID and our authentication token. So we've got config.twilio.sid, config.twilio.token. Forget what client options they have. It's been a hot minute since I've worked with Twilio. Whoops, I just saw it. Client ops. Yeah, nothing I need here. You could probably give it a singular object instead of like flat, sequential properties. Let's see, they have account SID. They don't have like a token property, so maybe not. They do let you pass in potentially, I've noticed that AWS SDK started doing this a couple years ago, but you can actually, with some libraries now, not provide any credentials manually. And if you don't do that, they will themselves look for process.env. Whatever, variable name of choice, which is really, really cool. That means that you don't have to set up a config object or do validation. The library itself will actually extract that info out of process.env for you, which is really cool. All right, but that is our Twilio mailing client, or I say mailing, messaging client, and that should theoretically let me send messages. Now, I'm gonna have this function send text here, which is gonna let me take a message, sure, of a string, then a phone number, which must be a string. So for Twilio's structural format, they do require you to have like your country code preface, and then after that it is strictly numbers only, no other punctuation. So like for a local area code for us, 205, we would have to have the preface of +1 205, then 8675309, or whatever numbers. So numbers, we're not doing math with these phone numbers. They're going to be strictly strings. And then we will return client dot messages dot create, and then there's a to property, which will be our number, and then there is a body property, the text content of the outgoing message, which will be our message. And then, yeah, I mean, Twilio is just really quick and easy to set up. Like that's frankly it. Yeah, so we can, if we want, go ahead and just do a quick test of this in our server. Import config, from config, we'll import SMS from services SMS, and then SMS dot send text to Lamau got him, and then config dot Twilio dot gvoice. So we haven't done any like specific validation here on individual properties. So what we would need to do here, or what we can do for our config, we are having this validator, tell us if anything is missing in general, but it's not telling us in the event we have one missing if another one could potentially be missing. So TypeScript is going to be like a little more hands-off. It would say like, oh, well, gvoice could be undefined, and that would throw an error, but number could also be undefined, so we are not going to assert that as a string. So what we could do is we could just, cast every one of these as a string, which is fine because that means all of our usage of it in our code base is going to know it as a string in the event any of those singular properties were undefined. Well, that's why we've got these validators here. They are checking every single environment variable, making sure that we do not have any undefined values. So if we wanted to, we could go ahead and cast every one of these as a string. which it looks like, okay, yeah, I may have talked about that in a previous video, because it certainly looks like that's how I've got my code handling everything else. So all right. Yeah, let's run it. So now it's understanding that this is just strictly a string because we forced it to think that, because we've got that validator running. Let's see, we have a Twilio, a from or messaging service SID. Whoops. I need to say who my text message is from. And that's going to be your Twilio number itself. So config.twilio.number. And this returns a promise. I'm not like awaiting the results of it and like logging out any of its details. So we're not going to see anything unless I have like an uncaught error. So, but I think that should have generated a text. Let me pause for a moment and then we can check our results. And there we go. I was just doing some element inspector to get some of my other text out the way, but we do have this from my Twilio number, sending out Lamau got him. And if we want, we can go ahead and watch that live. Say, look how easy it is to send a text. And VS Code may have actually saved it a couple times in that interim. I do have like really aggressive autosave tendencies, so we might have a few different texts. Cool. It only saved like right at the very end, but we have it saying, look how easy it is to send a text. And if we look at the amount of code it took, I mean, we set up environment variables, so I don't really constitute that as code. We imported Twilio, we created our Twilio client, we created a function that takes a message and a number, and then that's really it. Like, nothing. Easy peasy. It is so freaking easy to use. So that's why I love Twilio. Whether you're using it for giant enterprise stuff or if you are using it for just maybe small features on one of your apps like text message, reminders, or maybe even multi-factor authentication, whatever your use case is, Twilio is always my go-to. So, well, I hope you've been enjoying everything thus far. And like I said, you know, even if you're not a watcher of this series and you just found this by random happenstance, please, you know, if you want, go check out the first video in this series and see if maybe it's an app you'd like to build yourself. And if you're not subscribed, I would go ahead and suggest doing that so you can watch future subsequent videos in this series. But yeah, until then, I'll catch y'all later.